Christmas Eve used to be the one night of the year when everything felt right. When the house smelled like nutmeg and sugar, when the world outside seemed to hush itself under a blanket of snow, and even my parents' constant comparisons between me and my sister seemed to fade for a few precious hours. It was the one evening when I could almost believe we were a normal, loving family. But that illusion, fragile as tinsel, shattered completely last year. The living room looked picture perfect that night, the kind of cozy chaos you see in glossy magazines. A 12-foot tree glittered in the corner, every branch precisely trimmed with gold and silver ornaments. My mother's touch was everywhere. Matching red stockings labeled Mom, Dad, Amber, and finally mine, Lily, dangling at a slight angle as if it didn't quite belong. The fireplace crackled with the warmth of burning pine, and the faint hum of Silent Night played from the old stereo my father refused to replace. Everything smelled like cinnamon and nostalgia. I remember standing there with a cup of mulled wine, watching my family gather near the tree. Amber sat cross-legged on the rug, radiant in her new emerald green dress. Even under the soft glow of the Christmas lights, she looked like something out of a jewelry commercial, all polished confidence and easy charm. My mother's eyes never left her. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Mom said, her voice filled with the kind of affection I hadn't heard directed at me in years. She handed Amber a small velvet box wrapped in a perfect white ribbon. Amber's fingers trembled with anticipation, the kind of tremble that comes from knowing you're about to receive something extraordinary. She opened it and the light caught immediately, a diamond necklace, delicate and dazzling, each stone shimmering like frozen stars. My mother clasped her hands together. "Do you like it? We had it custom made." Amber gasped, holding it up to her throat. "Oh my God, it's beautiful. Mom, Dad, I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Dad chuckled. "You've earned it, kiddo." Earned it. The word stung like cold air against raw skin. Amber had always been the golden child, a high-achieving, conventionally perfect daughter who made life look effortless. I, on the other hand, was the one who'd chosen the wrong major, the wrong friends, the wrong lifestyle, at least in their eyes. I built something of my own, an architectural startup that was finally taking shape, but they never saw the value in it. To them, if it didn't come with a steady paycheck or a ring on my finger, it wasn't worth acknowledging. When the laughter died down, Mom turned toward me with a bright, expectant smile, the kind that feels rehearsed. "And for you, Lily." She handed me an envelope, thin and weightless. "We thought this would be more practical." I tried to match her cheer as I tore it open. A $25 Starbucks gift card. At first I laughed. A reflex. That awkward sound people make when they're sure they've misunderstood. But no one else laughed. Dad nodded approvingly. "You always liked coffee, right?" Amber tilted her head, biting her lip to suppress a smile. Something inside me twisted, not jealousy exactly, but something heavier, something years in the making. I told myself over and over that I didn't need their validation, that my independence was proof enough. But in that moment, holding that little card in my hand while my sister's diamonds caught every flicker of firelight, I realized how foolish I'd been. I spent the rest of the evening doing what I'd learned to do best, performing normalcy. I smiled for photos, laughed at Dad's bad jokes, poured wine for everyone but myself. The air smelled of roasted turkey and clove, but all I could taste was bitterness. Every time Amber leaned forward, the diamonds glinted like little reminders of my place in the family hierarchy. When it came time for the annual family photo, Mom insisted we stand by the tree, the perfect family, as she called it. She placed Amber in the center, draping an arm proudly around her. Dad stood beside them, one hand resting casually on her shoulder. I was on the far left, half cropped out by the edge of the frame. I remember thinking that maybe the camera was honest in ways people weren't. Later that night, I found myself outside on the porch, the snow muffling the world into silence. Through the window, I could see them, my family, laughing, posing, reliving the same patterns of affection and favoritism that had defined my life since childhood. Amber twirled, showing off her necklace as my parents clapped and cheered. My mother's eyes shone with pride. My father's laughter shook the air. No one noticed I wasn't there. It hit me then, in a way it never had before, that I wasn't invisible because they forgot me. I was invisible because they chose not to see me. I was a reminder of everything they didn't value. Independence, imperfection, nonconformity. They saw Amber as the mirror of themselves, the legacy worth preserving. And me? I was the stray branch on the family tree, tolerated, trimmed when necessary, but never celebrated. I went home that night and sat in my apartment, the quiet hum of the city outside my window. I stared at the gift card lying on the table. $25. That was the price of their affection, the value they'd placed on me. I could almost hear my father's voice. You always liked coffee, right? The next morning, I watched Amber's posts flood social media. Close-ups of her diamonds, captions about family love and blessed moments. Each photo was a polished lie, the one that people adored. Comments poured in, beautiful family, so lucky, you and your sister look just alike. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. That Christmas didn't just break me, it woke me up. It was the moment I finally understood that sometimes love isn't the glue that holds a family together. Sometimes it's the illusion that keeps you from walking away. It didn't happen all at once, it calcified slowly, the way hard water leaves a film you don't notice until the glass won't shine anymore. Amber's pedestal looked harmless at first. Gold star stickers on chore charts, an extra scoop of ice cream for the straightest student, a new pair of patent shoes, because the recital is important. I learned to clap from the second row, which is a useful skill if you plan on surviving a family like mine. I'd also learned to swallow commentary before it reached my tongue. No one in my house wanted analysis, they wanted applause. By middle school, the family scripts were memorized. Mom narrated Amber's successes in Technicolor, class council, debate captain, AP test scores recited with the gravity of scripture, while she reduced me into a convenient silhouette, creative, spirited, not the academic one. In our kitchen lexicon, those adjectives meant nice but unserious, like paper crowns after a birthday party. Dad kept a small whiteboard on the fridge where he tracked Amber's college tour dates and scholarship deadlines. My name, when it appeared at all, was a reminder to pick up art supplies before they close. The difference wasn't subtle, it was structural. When Amber got her learner's permit, Dad took her to the dealership just to look, and returned with a silver BMW that gleamed like a verdict in our driveway. Safety first, he said, as if leather seats and a backup camera were moral positions. The salesman shook Amber's hand, then mine, then asked if I'd be the one handling the photo shoot for Instagram. I was 16 and old enough to know the hierarchy: driver, passenger, photographer. I took the picture. My father posted it with the caption, "Proud of our girl." Neither he nor my mother noticed my reflection trapped in the polished hood like a ghost. I applied to architecture programs with a zeal I didn't feel the need to defend. Buildings had rules and grace at once. They asked you to respect load paths and then dared you to surprise them. If people are houses, I figured some of us are built for roof lines and others for facades. When the offer letters came, I laid them out on the dining table like a careful skyline. Mom glanced over the acceptance packets and sighed with a kind of embellished regret. Architecture? It's lovely. But darling, business is practical. Business travels. She said travel's the way people say cures cancer. Let her try, Dad added, in the same tone he used when he let the dog wear a raincoat. Loans, they said, would build character. Amber's tuition came as a wire transfer and a toast. Mine came as a promissory note with interest. I learned the monetary definition of character while mopping floors at a campus cafe until 2 in the morning, then drafting studio elevations until dawn. My T-square a metronome, keeping rhythm with exhaustion. Instant noodles taught me about the architecture of hunger. Flimsy scaffold, strong enough to hold you upright even when you sway. On good weeks I splurged on eggs. On exam weeks I lived on coffee and the irrational hope that passion could metabolize debt. Design studios became a sanctuary and a proving ground. While other students pinned up glossy renderings of museums that would never be built, I grew obsessed with careful, honest structures, affordable housing that granted dignity instead of bare compliance, clinic layouts that cut steps for nurses whose feet were already sore. I calculated daylighting angles until the sun felt like a partner, measured clearances until my muscles memorized 36 inches the way a pianist knows middle C. No one at home asked about my work, so I began writing long captions under my own pinned drawings, as if some future witness might stop and read. When I placed in a regional competition with a modular shelter design, my professor slapped the table and yelled, "Finally, someone who understands that beauty and budget are not sworn enemies." I forwarded the email to my parents. Mom responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Dad didn't reply. Graduation day smelled like cut grass and fresh cardstock. Amber sent a bouquet of roses with a card that read, "Proud of you, sis," the exclamation point doing all the labor. My parents beamed in the photos without asking what, exactly, I planned to do with an art degree. I didn't bother correcting the label. Explaining the difference between architecture and artsy to someone determined not to hear it is a design problem without a sight. I rented a windowless corner of a co-working space with bad carpets and terrible fluorescent lighting and called it a firm. On paper, the name looked official. In practice, it was me, a refurbished laptop, a second-hand plotter that screamed like a feral cat, and a calendar divided into paying clients, speculative proposals, and red bills due yesterday. I learned to negotiate with contractors who called me sweetheart, until I recited code sections from memory. I learned to mark up RFIs at midnight and to pretend that sleep was a frivolous amenity. I learned that a bank account can be both starving and bullish in the same month. Momentum disguised hunger, purpose disguised loneliness, competence disguised the ache of being unseen. Word of mouth, slow and stubborn as ivy, finally began to climb my phone. A community clinic board hired me after I rearranged their circulation on a napkin and found them 2 extra exam rooms without knocking down a wall. A teachers' cooperative brought me a laundry list of wish-it-were-possible requests. I budgeted, resequenced, phased it across summers, and made it possible. The checks didn't look like windfalls, they looked like validation written in the only language my debt understood. I didn't tell my parents about the contracts. They didn't ask. We maintained detent through silence. I gave them no ammunition for doubt. They gave me no audience for joy. The house, my grandparents' house, waited like a comma in my life, a pause between clauses that I was still learning how to connect. A modest craftsman on a quiet street, it had a porch that sagged slightly in the middle as if it remembered laughter. My grandmother, Ruth, used to dust the window mullions with a paintbrush and speak to the house like it could hear. "We must keep your bones strong, old friend." She taught me to oil hinges, to sand with the grain, to read the rhythm of joists by the way the floorboards sang under your step. When she and my grandfather, Thomas, willed the place to me, they wrote in looping script that they wanted the house to belong to the person who listens when buildings talk. I was 19 when the lawyer slid the papers across his desk, and I cried not because of the gift, but because being chosen felt like oxygen after a long-held breath. I didn't move in right away. The commute would have gutted my hour counts, and my life, lean, provisional, ferociously focused, fit where I lived. So I kept the house insured, paid the taxes on time, hired a neighbor to mow, patched the porch when it blistered. On Sunday afternoons, I'd bring a thermos and sit on the stairs tracing the way winter light grazed the banister like a hand. I spoke to the house the way my grandmother had. I told it my plans: restore the built-ins, refinish the floors, open the kitchen without stealing the house's memory. Someday, I promised. Not yet, but someday. Amber got engaged during one of those breathless months when my deadlines collided in a pileup. Jason, tall, cheerful, the kind of man who called everyone buddy, slid into the family with the buoyant confidence of someone used to doors opening. The engagement photo looked like a catalog for successful beginnings: vineyard sunset, white shirt sleeves rolled just so. Amber's smile doing that effortless thing our mothers had taught us both and only one of us had mastered. Mom staged an engagement brunch. Dad gave a toast. Jason made a joke about architects loving tiny pencils. I laughed at the punchline and filed away the tone. When they announced they were house hunting, it was both a plan and a performance. Listings were toured. Offers were strategized. Mostly, they looked for a property that would announce their future as loudly as Amber's ring announced her present. Prices lunged, appraisals dragged. The market behaved like weather, unpredictable, and always someone else's fault. At dinner one night, amid the noise of silverware and certainty, Mom turned to me with practiced casualness. "You're not even living in your grandparents' place, honey. It's sitting there empty. Let them stay for a little while, just until they close somewhere." Her voice used that benevolent register that sounds like generosity, but feels like a script read to an audience already coerced into applause. I hesitated for reasons I could articulate and others I could only feel. The articulate ones were structural: responsibilities, liability, the sanctity of a bequest intended for stewardship, not staging. The felt ones were older: a lifetime of yielding the center of rooms to the person expected to occupy them, a lifetime of learning that be kind in our family often translated to be quiet. Dad added in the smiling tone that collapses boundaries like bad framing. It would mean a lot to your sister. Meaning in our home had always traveled one direction. Jason promised it would be temporary. Amber promised they'd be careful. Mom promised I was doing the right thing. No one asked what the right thing was for me. I heard my grandmother's voice in memory, keep the bones strong, and countered it with my own vows to be the kind of person who doesn't weaponize ownership against family. I agreed. Out of guilt, yes, but also out of a reflex I'd practiced since childhood. Step aside, make room, tell yourself that yielding is grace. I told myself I was being generous because I wanted that to be true. I told myself I could set terms and be heard, that respect might grow where it had never been planted. I told myself many things. I drafted a short list of boundaries: no structural changes, no parties, no overnight guests without notice, utilities in their name, a written month to month, and sent it to Amber as neutrally as language permits. She responded with heart emojis and "you're the best." I printed the agreement and filed it in a cabinet labeled Legacy. I stood in the empty living room later that week, watching light stipple the oak floor, and convinced myself that love and stewardship could coexist. I turned the key, locked the door, and handed the spare to my sister. It was, I see now with the clarity of hindsight and the ache of loyalty, a design flaw disguised as kindness. A load-bearing lie. A beautiful, terrible mistake. It was supposed to be a quick visit, just a drive out to the old neighborhood to make sure the gutters hadn't collapsed under the early winter rain. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter the closer I got, a pit settling in my stomach I couldn't quite name. The street still looked the same: trimmed hedges, polished mailboxes, houses that wore their stability like a badge. But as soon as my grandparents' home came into view, the illusion cracked. The front yard, my grandfather's pride, looked like it had been abandoned for a season too long. The lawn, once clipped to military precision, sprawled out in uneven tufts of yellowing grass. Dead leaves clung stubbornly to the gutters, while the old maple tree bent under the weight of untrimmed branches. The trash bins overflowed, lids ajar, a tableau of fast food containers and crumpled wine boxes spilling out like careless confessions. The "for the love of home" welcome mat my grandmother had hand-stitched was now a faded, mud-caked rag pressed into the porch boards. Something in me went cold. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the scent hit first. Not the gentle musk of cedar and lemon oil my grandmother had loved, but something sharp and synthetic, like too many perfumes and too little air. The living room, once a museum of family history, was unrecognizable. My grandparents' solid oak furniture had been pushed into a corner, draped in sheets like relics no one cared to dust. In their place sprawled a mix of glass and chrome, designer furniture that looked allergic to comfort. A velvet sofa the color of bruises faced a massive TV mounted crookedly on the wall. Empty wine bottles lined the coffee table like trophies. A lipstick-stained glass teetered near the edge, next to a half-burned candle that smelled of something cloying and expensive. I caught sight of a shattered picture frame under the table, the photo of my grandparents and me at my architecture school graduation. The glass was cracked across my face. Every inch of that room felt like an insult. I found Amber in the kitchen, her hair tied back, scrolling through her phone as if she owned the air in the house. Jason sat at the counter, flipping through a real estate magazine with the kind of detached ease that made me want to break something. "What happened here?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Amber looked up, unfazed. "What do you mean?" I gestured at the chaos around me. "You've ruined the place, Amber. The yard, the furniture, everything. It looks like a frat house." She let out a small, exasperated laugh. "Oh, come on, Lily. You're being dramatic. It's just a house." "No," I said, heat rising in my chest. "It's not just a house. It's my house, the one Grandma and Grandpa left to me. The one they built with their own hands. The one you promised to take care of." Amber leaned against the counter, her expression tilting into something condescending. "Actually," she said slowly, "Mom said you wouldn't mind. You've always been so generous." That word, generous, hit like a slap. I knew what she meant. It wasn't a compliment. It was a reminder that in our family, generosity had always been the leash they used to keep me compliant. My throat tightened. "You had no right." Jason didn't even look up. "We'll clean up," he muttered. "It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal," I snapped. "You've disrespected everything about this place." Amber rolled her eyes, dismissive and smug. "Lily, it's not like you live here. Honestly, you should be grateful someone's keeping it alive. Houses need people, you know. Otherwise they just rot. The irony nearly made me laugh, this from the woman who'd left half the yard to die. I wanted to say more, to yell, to tear into the years of small humiliations that had piled up like invisible dust in my lungs. But I saw it then, the ease with which she shrugged, the absence of guilt, and I knew there was no point. Amber had always operated with the quiet certainty that Mom and Dad's approval would cushion her from consequences. She didn't have to fear me because in her world I wasn't someone to fear. I was the shadow orbiting her light. I turned and left before the anger could swallow me whole. Outside, the air felt thin and biting. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that the leather creaked beneath my hands. My reflection in the windshield looked foreign. Tight-lipped, hollow-eyed, trembling from something deeper than rage. The drive home blurred into a haze of streetlights and white noise. Every red light seemed to whisper reminders of every injustice I had swallowed over the years. Every time I'd let them take and take because I didn't want to be the one who made a scene. I remembered my father's patronizing laugh when I showed him the deed years ago. "That's sweet of your grandparents. You'll probably sell it one day anyway." I remembered my mother's soft but firm voice, always ready to excuse Amber's carelessness. "She didn't mean it, Lily. You're just more sensitive." Maybe I was sensitive, but sensitivity isn't weakness. It's awareness. It's what architects rely on, noticing the crack before the wall collapses. And that night, I saw the cracks everywhere, not in the house, but in the family itself. The favoritism, the entitlement, the assumption that my silence was endless. For days afterward, anger simmered under my skin like a fever I couldn't sweat out. I'd wake up thinking about it, replaying the conversation, crafting the words I should have said. Work meetings blurred around me, even my sketches turned rigid, lines drawn too sharply, as if precision could replace peace. Then one evening my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mrs. Langley, my grandparents' old neighbor. "Hi dear, I saw Amber out front today. She said she's planning to host a big engagement party soon, at your place. I thought you'd already moved back in." I stared at the screen, disbelief turning slowly into clarity. My hands went cold. They weren't just squatting. They were celebrating, throwing a party, parading their future in a house built on my family's past. And that was it, the final fracture. The moment something inside me snapped back into place. Not broken, but realigned. That Christmas, I decided, would not be like the last. Not anymore. I chose the envelope carefully. Red, thick, the kind of paper that feels significant in the hand. I slid the notice inside along with a copy of the lease addendum I'd drafted and the time-stamped photos of the property, the broken frame, the wine stains, the overflowing bins. The document was precise, each clause as crisp as frost. Tenancy at will, 30 days notice, restoration of premises, forwarding address required. I signed my name with a pen that didn't blot. I wanted no smudges. No room for anyone to say they couldn't read the truth. The house looked like a Christmas card again, the same well-practiced tableau. Pine garland braided with gold ribbon, a fir tree heavy with glass ornaments my mother unpacked from tissue with a reverence she never extended to people. The good candlesticks, my father liked to say, lifting them like a magician's props. Amber stood near the mantel, a bright flare of emerald silk and apatite, basking in the attention that gathered itself instinctively around her like moths to a porch light. Jason hovered nearby, the reliable satellite, all cologne and easy teeth. I stepped into the room and the air tilted. Conversations paused, then dissolved into that weird, brittle quiet families get when someone refuses their choreography. Mom's smile snapped into place, too wide, too much tooth. "Lily," she sang out, finding a tone somewhere between relief and stage fright. "We didn't think you'd come." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, matching her brightness and letting it sit there, thin as cellophane. The red envelope weighed almost nothing. Still, I felt its center of gravity pulling me steady. Amber turned, greeted me with a perfunctory cheek kiss that smelled like citrus and victory. "Look," she said, lifting her hand. The ring threw starbursts onto the ceiling, diamond facets slicing the firelight into neat, expensive constellations. Jason upgraded it. Totally unexpected. She said unexpected like a compliment she'd rehearsed. A word meant to translate as I deserve it, and of course I got it. "That's nice," I said, soft as a whetstone. "Speaking of upgrades." Her attention flicked to the envelope I held. The room leaned forward without moving. Dad shifted his weight. Jason stilled. Mom's fingers tightened around a wine glass until the stem made a small, warning sound. I crossed the rug, the wool resisting under my boots just enough to register as friction, and handed the envelope to my sister. Another card. She teased, already opening it. She slid the papers out, expecting cash or sentiment or a theater of apology. Her smile drained first from her mouth, then from her eyes, as if someone had pulled a plug. She read the bold header, her lips parted. "What is this?" My voice came out level, measured, as if I were drafting aloud. "It's an official eviction notice. 30 days to vacate. The house is mine. You'll find all the terms inside." Mom made the sound candles make just before they gutter, a soft gas that aims to extinguish the spark. "Lily," she said, bringing my name down like a gavel. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. I did not raise my voice, I let the paperwork do the volume. You've treated me like I'm optional for years. The house never was. It was Grandma and Grandpa's legacy, and you've disrespected it, and me. Not anymore." Amber looked from the first page to the second as if a nicer outcome might be hiding in the footnotes. "You're kidding," she said finally, a tremor of laughter misfiring in her throat. "On Christmas Eve? You're actually doing this now?" "Yes," I said. "Now, when you're all here to hear it correctly." Jason stood, color blooming quick and careless across his jaw. "You can't just." "I can," I said, and turned slightly so he could see the notarized stamp, the date, the clause numbers lined up like soldiers. "Because it's mine." I let the last word settle, not as a boast, but as a boundary. Then I added, almost gently, "Merry Christmas." The room came apart on cue. Mom's cries rose first, notes of disbelief braided with performance. "How could you? We're family. This is cruel, Lily." Dad's disbelief followed, a sputter of incredulous noises as if he'd swallowed a marble, and couldn't decide whether to show it to me or choke on it. "There's a way we do things," he said, and I heard the architecture of his sentence, the assumption that the way we do things is always the way they prefer the world to behave. Amber's anger arrived last and loudest. "You have always been jealous," she said, the kind of sentence that abandons reason for blunt instruments. Her voice sharpened as she flipped pages she refused to read. "You know we're planning our engagement party. You know we're—" She cut a look at our mother, converting anger into appeal. "Mom, say something." Mom obliged, stepping toward me, palms upturned, another ancient pantomime of reason. "We could have talked. You didn't have to ambush us." "I tried to talk," I said. "You told me I was being dramatic." I glanced at Amber, then Jason. "You said I should be grateful the house had people in it so it wouldn't rot." I gestured toward the papers. "It's been rotting under you." Dad found a different tactic, softer, sliding reason into a shape that had worked on me when I was young and eager to be fair. 30 days isn't enough, we need time." "You've had time," I answered. "This is me drawing a line, not a lightning strike." I didn't add that I had the certified mail queued and the county clerk's office looped in. The line was clean enough without those reinforcements. Jason took a step toward me, the movement meant to intimidate, to make me forget that men like him are often louder than they are right. "You're doing this because you're bitter," he said. "You don't want your sister to be happy." Happiness, I thought, is a poor alibi for trespass. I'm doing this because boundaries are not insults, they're structure. I felt my pulse steady, a metronome finding the tempo of a room I finally owned. If not their respect, then my choices. And because the house has a voice and you never learn to listen. He scoffed, the sound brittle. "Houses don't talk." "Then you've never lived in one." Silence spread, and in it I could hear the small, private noises that fill a room when a family realizes their script has been discontinued. Fork against plate, the faint pop of resin in the fire, the tremor of ice shifting in glasses people no longer wanted to drink from. Amber stared at the papers like she could will them to rearrange into a different verdict. Her mouth worked around words she couldn't find. The diamonds at her throat glittered with vigilant brightness, as if showing off could outshine consequence. I slipped my coat back on, each button a small ritual, each gesture an anchor. Mom reached for me, fingers skimming the sleeve like she was trying to smooth out a crease in a narrative that refused ironing. "Pleased," she said, voice falling into the old register of negotiation, a music I used to dance to without knowing it. "We can figure this out after the holidays." I shook my head once. After the holidays is how you keep me waiting. I picked up my bag, felt the reassuring shape of the extra copies inside. Everything you need to know is in the envelope. It's clear. It's lawful. It's final. Amber's sputtering rage found a new shell, ridicule. You're really proud of yourself, aren't you? Dropping papers like you're the sheriff. Proud isn't the word, I said. Relieved, maybe. I looked at her, at the woman who'd always been told the room belonged to her, who'd learned to breathe in other people's oxygen without noticing the shortage. You were counting on me to stay quiet. That's the only thing that's changed. I'm not. I turned toward the hall. The tree lights pulsed behind me, little mechanical heartbeats. I could feel, without seeing, the portrait over the mantel, my grandparents' faces. Holding their calm, the way old photographs seem to know about storms the living haven't named yet. I paused at the threshold and inhaled cinnamon, pine, the metallic edge of cut crystal, and under it all the faint, stubborn scent of lemon oil worked into wood years ago by hands that believed care was a verb. I walked out. The corridor swallowed the noise behind me into murk and echo. The front door's brass knob was cold, honest, unadorned. My boots met the porch with a hollow thud, and winter air poured itself around me, bright as water. The yard, even unkempt, remembered its lines. The sky was the hard blue that only happens when the temperature drops low enough to insist on clarity. Snow began in the distance, shy and certain. I didn't look back through the window. I didn't need to see their faces or the choreography of outrage repeating itself like a familiar hymn. The envelope was in the room. The words were in the air. The boundary stood where no one had expected it, visible at last as a wall you notice only once you bump into it. I descended the steps, each one an exact measure, and crossed the walk my grandfather had poured himself. At the gate, I paused long enough to close the latch with care. It clicked in, small and decisive, the sound a house makes when it remembers who keeps its keys. I exhaled. The breath left white and hung there for a second, visible proof of a life carried on its own heat. For once, I didn't feel small, I felt proportioned. I felt aligned with the load paths of my own spine. In the clean night, with the cold honoring the edges of every surface it touched, I felt, finally, free. The first weeks after Christmas passed like a quiet storm. My phone became a battlefield, Amber's number lighting the screen morning and night, her messages oscillating between venom and pleading. One day she called sobbing, saying I had destroyed the family. The next, she sent a voice note dripping with rage. You'll regret this, Lily. Everyone will see what kind of person you really are. But she was wrong. For once, the truth wasn't a rumor whispered behind my back. It was written in black ink, signed, stamped, and upheld by a court of law. When she tried to contest the eviction, she didn't expect I'd already filed every document, documented every infraction, every broken clause, every damaged item, every ignored message. My case wasn't built on emotion. It was built on evidence. The judge barely needed 15 minutes. He read, frowned, and nodded. The property belongs to Ms. Hale. The tenants are to vacate within 30 days. Amber's face in that courtroom told a story no words could match, disbelief curdling into humiliation, the first crack in a lifetime of unearned confidence. Jason sat beside her, his jaw clenched, his arrogance finally dimming in the sterile light of accountability. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. Justice doesn't need applause. It only needs to land. When the day came for them to leave, the house stood still, as if holding its breath. A moving truck idled in the driveway, its exhaust curling into the gray January sky. Through the front window, I saw Amber pacing, her phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly at someone who clearly wasn't answering. Jason hauled boxes out with a sullen determination, his footsteps heavy against the porch boards my grandfather had once varnished by hand. I stayed inside my car, parked a few houses down. Watching from a distance wasn't about cruelty, it was about closure. I wanted to witness the ending of a story that had defined too much of my life. When the last box disappeared into the truck, Amber slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. For a brief moment, she turned toward the street, scanning as if she could feel my eyes somewhere in the silence. Then she looked away. The truck pulled off, its tires crunching the gravel my grandmother had laid decades ago. When they were gone, I waited until the air settled before I stepped out. The winter light fell softly across the yard, cold, clean, impartial. The front door creaked when I opened it, and the smell hit me. Stale wine, burnt wax, the residue of other people's disregard. I walked through each room slowly, tracing the scars they'd left: a scuffed baseboard, a cracked tile, a cigarette burn on the porch railing. Every mark felt like a chapter of intrusion, now ready to be rewritten. I rolled up my sleeves. For weeks, I worked in silence, stripping, sanding, painting, patching, restoring. Each brushstroke became a conversation with the past, an act of reclamation. I sanded down the banister until the grain of the wood reappeared, golden and smooth beneath my fingers. I replaced every broken frame and rehung the curtains my grandmother had sewn herself. The floors drank in new stain like thirsty soil, releasing a faint, familiar scent of cedar and polish that carried me back to childhood afternoons when she'd hum old songs while cleaning. The transformation wasn't about aesthetics. It was about erasure, not of memory, but of damage. It was about honoring what was left behind by people who built with love, not entitlement. Every nail I drove into the wall felt like setting something back in alignment. When the last coat of paint dried, I stood in the center of the living room, the same space that had once been filled with noise and contempt, and listened. The silence had changed. It wasn't hollow anymore. It was peaceful, dense with belonging. I unpacked one box. Inside was a single photograph, framed in dark walnut. My grandparents on their porch, the day they finished building the house. They were younger than I am now, my grandmother's hands dusted with sawdust, my grandfather's eyes bright with pride. I placed the photo above the fireplace, right where their portrait had always hung. That night, I lit the fire for the first time in years. The flames took gently, curling upward with a soft hiss, and the scent of burning pine mingled with the faint memory of lemon oil and warm bread. I sat cross-legged on the floor, wrapped in an old quilt, and felt the warmth climb slowly into my chest. It struck me then, how long I had spent measuring love by recognition, waiting for someone else's approval to confirm my worth. But love, real love, doesn't arrive wrapped in diamonds or applause. It shows itself in quiet acts, in the steady protection of something sacred, in the refusal to let disrespect rewrite your story. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's the sound of paint drying on reclaimed walls, a fire crackling in a room that's finally yours again. My parents still call sometimes. They never mention the eviction, the lawsuit, or Amber's brief tantrum in the courthouse hallway. Instead, they ask about work, about the weather, about the updates to the house, as though the last few months were just an inconvenient blur. I answer politely, my voice steady, my boundaries intact. The calls never last long. I no longer seek explanations. Some truths don't need to be reconciled, they only need to be lived beyond. Now, every Christmas, I decorate the tree with the same ornaments my grandmother kept in their original boxes, the ones that had once been overshadowed by my parents' extravagance. I light the same fireplace, pour a single glass of red wine, and whisper a thank you to the people who taught me that dignity is worth defending, even when it means standing alone. Outside, snow gathers softly on the windowsill. Inside, the house hums with warmth. They gave my sister diamonds. I gave them consequences. And as the fire crackles and the scent of cedar fills the air, I finally understand. Some gifts shine longer than gold, because they are earned, not given.